She still wasn't looking at him. He picked up his wine glass, put it down. What are you not telling me? She shifted on the couch, pulled her knees up, and put her arms around them so her body was one tight ball. Oh, Drew, I was so mean to her. Her voice caught. She stopped, closed her eyes, and swallowed before continuing. I was mean and snotty and insulting. I made her feel so bad for what happened. I did it on purpose. I became a tattletale to our parents for everything I thought she was doing wrong. We barely spoke for the better part of a year, and even after that, our relationship was fractious and difficult for years. We didn't really start becoming friends again until I was in college, and even then, it took years for us to be close. She paused, clearly lost in thought, and shook her head. I feel like, if I managed to make this happen, it would be my way of making up for everything. He moved across the couch and put his arm around her. She was so tense he wasn't sure how she'd react to his touch. But she relaxed against him and released her knees. And if you don't manage to make this happen? What then? She shook her head as it rested against his shoulder. He turned toward her and kissed her hair. He felt her sigh. Then it's me failing her again. If I can't do this one thing for my sister, for my family, for all of those other kids who need something like this like she did, he pulled her closer to him, so happy to be with her. It felt wrong to be happy when she was on the point of tears, but he was honored that she was sharing this with him. This conversation felt like a gift. You know that's not true, right? That if it doesn't pass this time, it's not your fault? That all you can do is give everything you have to this, and you know you have been? You do know all that? She shrugged and turned away from him. Okay. Did that mean she didn't want to talk about this anymore? He wasn't sure if he should keep talking, but he had one more question for her. Have you talked to Olivia about this? Have you told her what you're trying to do, and why? She hesitated and shook her head. We haven't. We don't really talk about that at all. At first, I was too ashamed to say anything, and now it seems like it's been too long. He didn't respond at first, not quite sure what to say. She reached for the slice of pizza he'd put on her plate and had eaten half of it before he spoke again. So, if TARP did pass, how were you going to tell her? You were going to tell her, right? She swallowed, took a sip of her wine, and swallowed again. Yeah. I've thought about that. I was going to email her a link to a news article about it. With something like, look what your little sister has been up to, or, terrible name, great program, right? She sighed. Okay, maybe both of those ideas are stupid, but you know what I mean. He laughed and squeezed her hand. The tense look on her face relaxed and she squeezed back. Maybe you should talk to her. Before the hearing, I mean. About TARP, yeah, this is a great thing you're trying to do, and I know she'd be proud. But also about the other stuff you told me. I'm sure she would want to know. She shook her head again but didn't let go of his hand. It was so hard for me to tell you, Drew. I don't even know how I would tell her how I felt, or what I would say. He turned her so that her legs were draped over his and took her face in both his hands. Say to her what you said to me. Just think about it, okay? I think it would make you feel better. She leaned her forehead against his and closed her eyes. He wrapped his arms around her, and they sat there for a while, breathing each other in. I'll think about it, she said. He moved an inch closer to her, and their lips clung together slowly, gently. He wanted to deepen the kiss but pulled away. Now, finish that slice of pizza so you don't have a hangover in the morning. Your doctor insists on it. She laughed, as he'd been hoping she would. How many children do you have to advise about hangovers, Dr. Nichols? He stood up to take the pizza box and the empty wine bottle to the kitchen. You'd be surprised. Though most of my patients have hangovers of the Halloween candy variety. Her laughter echoed through the house as he walked to the kitchen. He was so glad he'd come. When he came back from the kitchen, Alexa had dutifully eaten all of her pizza but the crust. He made fun of her for that, as he'd done when she was in L.A. Yet another similarity you have with my patients. He grabbed her hands and pulled her to her feet. You eat your pizza like a toddler. She kept her hands in his and looked up at him. She felt wrung out emotionally, but she couldn't stop smiling at him. It was so nice to have him here, in her living room, just being here with her, on a Tuesday night. She could get used to this. She shook that thought away. Did you have any plans in mind for the rest of the night? She asked him. He pulled her close to him. I don't know. What were you thinking? His lips trailed down her neck as she considered. We could check out a show on Netflix? Or, ooh, I'm listening to this great audiobook about segregation in American cities. We could listen together. He unzipped her hoodie and bit her shoulder. She gasped and giggled all at the same time. Unless you had another plan? He straightened up, his eyes focused on her face as he ran his hands down her body. She closed her eyes against the sensation and moaned. She opened her eyes to see him looking down at her. His shirt was half unbuttoned, his hair was on end, his eyes focused on her and only her. He looked like he'd been sculpted from her wildest fantasies. You drive me crazy, Alexa. Did you know that? She shook her head and licked her suddenly dry lips. Holy shit, how did this man still do this to her? Shouldn't this hunger for him and his body and his touch have worn off already? But no, it only seemed stronger now. He squeezed her nipple and she moaned again. My plan, you tease, was to spend the next few hours hearing you make that noise over and over again. What do you think about that plan, He pulled her closer to him and kissed that spot on her neck that she loved. She sighed. It's no Netflix or audiobook, but it'll do. He laughed, and before she could blink, he'd picked her up and thrown her over his shoulder. She pounded her hands on his back as he strode down the hall to her bedroom. What do you think you're doing? He turned on the light in her bedroom and kicked a pair of shoes out of his way. Less talk, Monroe. He dropped her on the bed. More action. How did the sex just keep getting better with her? Drew turned over onto his back, rolling her on top of him. Was there an earthquake, or a bomb, or a building collapse or something? He asked. I don't think so. Why? She turned her head to look out the window. Because my ears are ringing. He felt rather than heard her laugh. She laid her head on his chest and ran her hands up and down his still tingling body. His hands went to her hair, and he held them there, just enjoying the sensation of being with her again. When do you have to go back? She said against his chest. Oh right. He had to go back. My flight's at 7 in the morning. He pushed her hair over to the side so he could see her face. I'm so glad I came. She looked back at him and smiled, that wide smile that shone from every part of her face. He loved that smile. Me, too. Alexa got to work the next morning groggy but blissful. In the middle of the night she'd woken up to him kissing the back of her neck and turned to give him access to the rest of her body. This time it was slower, gentler, quieter, but the fireworks had gone off just the same. He'd refused to let her drive him to the airport that morning. He'd insisted it was too early and she should get some of the sleep that he'd robbed her of. She hadn't gotten any of that sleep. She'd jumped in the shower as soon as they'd kissed goodbye at her front door, but she'd loved him for saying so. She sank into her desk chair and barely managed to avoid spilling her coffee as that thought sank in. Loved him? Wait, no, that's not what she'd meant. She couldn't feel that way about him. That way was surely headed for heartbreak with a guy like Drew, but he clearly cared about her, right? He jumped on a plane to come see her for less than 12 hours. He had to feel something for her. Or was she just trying to believe he felt something for her because, despite what she was trying to tell herself, she felt something for him? Damn it, this wasn't what was supposed to happen. This thing was supposed to be easy and fun and light. Maybe she could ignore these feelings and hope they went away. Should she try to talk to Drew about how she felt? She shook her head. The only time she'd tried to talk about their relationship to Drew, it had been an unmitigated disaster. She didn't want to go through that again. Plus, she'd almost certainly scared him away after all of that race talk the night before. White men hated it when you reminded them of their privilege. She knew that all too well, but what was she supposed to do with all of these feelings now? Bury them in a corner, drink her damn coffee, and stop having major life crises at 8 a.m., that's what. She managed to distract herself with work for most of the day, but by 5:30 she gave up and called Maddie. She knew Maddie would tell her what to do. Drew walked into the hospital straight from the airport, thankful he'd had an extra shirt in his gym bag so he didn't have to stop at home. Now that he was away from Alexa, he felt stupid about dropping everything to go see her, even though it had felt great in the moment. Good God, he was an adult, he'd been a doctor for 4 years, and yet he got bad news about one of his patients and flew 500 miles just to hug one woman. He was getting in too deep. It was going to hurt way too much when it ended. It was going to hurt even more when she hated him. Like Molly had, he never should have flown up there. The whole thing, it had been too much. Too intimate. Part of him wanted to flee, never answer her text messages again, never see her again, forget he'd ever known her, but the thought of never seeing Alexa again made his stomach clench. He'd only left her this morning, and he still couldn't wait to see her this weekend. Of course, the first person he saw when he stepped off the elevator was Carlos. "Hey, man, you look like shit," was Carlos's friendly greeting. He paused and his smile fell. "Oh wait. I heard about Jack. That sucks. I'm sorry." Drew shrugged. What was he supposed to say? That's okay? It wasn't, really, and Carlos knew that. So he said nothing. "Where were you last night?" Carlos followed him into his office. "I called you, but your phone was off." He thought about lying, but he knew Carlos would find out eventually. He was like that. "I went up to Berkeley." Carlos stopped halfway into the chair. Damn it, he should have lied. He knew Carlos would make this into a bigger deal than it was. "Oh? Hard day, you needed a hug from your girl?" He settled into the chair and looked up at Drew with a smug expression. Drew was too tired and irritable for this. Whatever, that wasn't it. He shrugged and smirked. "I just needed some stress relief that I couldn't get from basketball. You know how it is." Carlos laughed, and for a minute, Drew thought Carlos would let it go. "That's how you're going to play it? It was just a booty call, right? Give me a break, you like this girl. You flew to the other end of the state to see her. Don't get me wrong, she's great, and I approve completely, but..." Drew cut him off before he went too far. "Okay, I knew you'd do this. Calm down. It was just an hour flight. I've driven to the valley to get laid before, same difference." Carlos rolled his eyes. Why was he friends with this guy again? First of all, no, you haven't. Okay, fine, he was right. Not that Drew was going to let him know that. Second, there's nothing wrong with going to hang out with your girl when you're upset. I'm glad she was there for you, man. Carlos took a sip of his coffee. Drew shook his head. That's not how it was. That was exactly how it was. I don't know why you keep acting like this thing with Alexa is some big deal, anyway. It's probably not going to last all that much longer. Carlos stared at him. Why wouldn't it? What did you do? Drew resisted the urge to flip him off, but only because a nurse walked by his open door. I didn't do anything. It's been going on for a while. We've had a good run. Better to end things while they're still good. Carlos's phone buzzed and he glanced at it, then back up at Drew. No offense, man, but don't be such a fucking idiot. I've seen the way you look at this girl. I've never seen you look at anyone or anything like you look at her. And you're just going to throw all of that away for some bullshit reason? Because you're too scared for something real? Carlos checked his phone again and stood up. I gotta go. But dude, stop being the idiot you always have been. Maddie was borrowing her car for the weekend, so she drove Alexa to the airport on Friday night. How are you feeling? Maddie asked. Could she even describe how she felt about seeing Drew this weekend? Excited to see him, on edge about what the weekend could bring, relaxed at just the thought of being around him, nervous. She had to talk to him. She had to know what was going on and how he felt before it was too late. Though she was afraid that ship had sailed, it was a lot easier when I wasn't overthinking this. Maddie turned to her at the stoplight. Didn't we both know that that could only last a weekend with you? Maybe a long weekend, maximum. They both laughed. Do you want a pep talk, or do you want to talk about something else? Maddie asked her. She thought for a second. A pep talk would just hype her up too much. Something else, please. Tell me about what's her name, your crazy new client. Maddie laughed. Oh my god, Alexa. Did I tell you what she wanted the other day? She needed cute exercise clothes, because she always runs into people she knows at the gym, right? But instead of Lululemon, she wanted exercise clothes that no one else has, so I had to dive into the world of $500 yoga pants and $200 sports bras, and let me tell you, that is a crazy world. They gossiped the rest of the way to the airport, and Maddie hugged her when she got out of the car. Good luck this weekend, Lex. Thanks for letting me use your car, and have a great trip. She hugged Maddie back. Anytime, Mads, you know that. And thanks. Drew left straight from the hospital to pick Alexa up at the airport. Carlos high-fived him as he walked down the hall toward the elevator. You'll be at Heather's 4th of July party on Sunday, right? Drew nodded as he got in the elevator. See you there. Alexa walked out of the terminal just as he drove up, and he jumped out of the car to kiss her. Okay, maybe he was being hasty about ending things. Maybe Carlos was right. He'd just been overtired and still upset about Jack on Wednesday morning. They could keep this going a little longer. He squeezed her hand as he got on the freeway toward his house. Did she look tense? She looked tense. Should he ask why? Hungry? That was an easier question. She shrugged off her cardigan. She was still in business mode, wearing one of those conservative dresses that he secretly loved. Starving. I barely had time for lunch, and I've depleted all of my office snacks this week. You want to go straight to dinner, then? That burger place again, maybe? She turned toward him and grabbed his knee. Man, he loved it every time she touched him. Yeah, they could definitely keep this thing going for a while longer. Yes, and can we get that tater tot casserole this time? I can't promise to eat it all, but it looked amazing. Apparently, many people had had the same idea for dinner that night. They stood together at the bar while they waited for a table, drinking beer and talking about everything and nothing. Didn't talk about Jack. He'd already texted her that the test results had come back positive, and he didn't want to bring both of them down. She didn't bring up her program, and he didn't ask, although he was dying to know whether she was going to talk to her sister about it. Instead, he told her about the kid who kept throwing things across the exam room and giggling, and how he had to step out in the hallway to laugh. She told him about the naked protesters who kept following the mayor around. As they laughed, the tense look on her face relaxed. Maybe it was the beer, but he hoped it was being with him. Just as he was about to ask her if she wanted another beer, he heard his name. He turned and saw his friends Robin and Lucy walking toward him. Hey. He hugged them both, then turned to introduce Alexa to them. Hey guys, this is Alexa. Alexa, meet Lucy and Robin. He'd almost slipped and called her his girlfriend. How the hell had that happened? No one had seemed to notice his flub, and Alexa was chatting away with Lucy, so he turned to Robin. You going to Heather's party on Sunday? Yeah, you? Just as he nodded, the hostess called his name, so they said their goodbyes and followed her to the table. This is my. What was he going to say? What was going to be the end of that sentence? Alexa guessed it didn't matter, because he hadn't finished it, so whatever he'd been about to say, he hadn't really meant. Still, she spent the entire time they were at dinner with that sentence fragment running through her head. Okay, maybe not the entire time. The rest of the time, she compared herself and the dowdy navy blue sheath dress she'd worn to work that day to Lucy and Robin in their cute little sundresses. And her didn't look good in a cute little sundress anyway. Figure to their non-existent hips and thighs. And the salads on their table to her tater tot casserole. Good God, she was a disaster. Why would she even think that he would finish that sentence the way she wanted him to? Monroe, is everything okay? You look worried about something. Drew leaned over and smoothed out the furrow between her eyebrows with his thumb. She couldn't help but smile when he did that. She almost asked him all of the questions in her head but decided against it. It wasn't the right time. She'd been stressed all week, she needed to relax tonight, plus, what would happen if all of his answers were the wrong ones? She'd spend the rest of the weekend miserable and pretending to smile. It's fine. I mean, I'm fine. I was just trying to decide between another beer or a glass of wine. They woke up the next morning wrapped around each other, the cool ocean breeze blowing in on them from his open window. She must have stirred, because his hand moved from her hip to her breast. "Good morning," he said against her ear. He caressed her body and she sighed in response. She likes that. Weird, I thought I heard someone say she couldn't take it anymore just a few hours ago. She held his hand in place when he tried to move it. If you heard that, and I'm not confirming that you did, whoever said that probably said until morning at the end there, but it was muffled somehow. In a pillow, maybe. He laughed and kissed her ear, her cheek, her neck, as his fingers kept moving. Okay, he definitely enjoyed some things about her body, whether it was built for little sundresses or not. "Coffee," she said into the pillow a while later. He turned her over and smiled down at her, his eyes roaming over her from her waist to the top of her head. She pulled his head down to hers and kissed him along his jawline. "How about," he turned his head and returned the kiss, "while I make coffee, you get ready so we can go to breakfast?" His hand was on her hip, his thumb drawing figure eights on her hip bone, and his eyes were locked on hers. Between all of that, she was powerless to say no to anything he asked. After breakfast at Drew's favorite diner, they stumbled back into his apartment and collapsed on the couch. "Good Lord, why have you never taken me to that place before?" Alexa asked him. "I've never had pancakes that good." He laughed. "I knew you'd like the pancakes, even though the biscuits are my favorite." He pulled out her ponytail so he could run his fingers through her hair, and she sighed and rested her head against his shoulder. "Monroe?" She turned and smiled at him, but she looked anxious again, like she had the night before. Maybe she needed to get work done? Yeah, that was probably it. She always needed to get work done. "I was maybe going to go for a run." "Did you? Is that cool? You'll be okay here for a while, right?" She turned away from him and sat up. "Yeah, that's fine. I can get some work done while you're gone." Yeah, he'd figured. He kissed her again as he stood up to go change into his running clothes. When he came back into the living room, her laptop was on her lap and she had that worried look on her face again. "Still, everything okay?" She jumped at the sound of his face and looked up. "Oh, yeah, fine. Just checking my email." He didn't quite believe that. He wanted to sit down next to her and ask more questions, find out what was really upsetting her. Or was it that she would rather email with her buddy Theo than talk to him? But her eyes were back on her screen, not him. He'd been dismissed. "Okay. I'll be back in an hour or so." "Okay." She didn't look up as he shut the door. Had he wanted her to go running with him? And had he changed his mind once he looked at her? Did he want to say that they should both go running after eating all that food, but decided that would hurt her feelings? Why had she been so filled with hope when he said Monroe like that? What did she think he was going to say? Was she going to drive herself insane asking herself questions like this all weekend? Signs point to yes. She took a shower to clear her head, pulled on a tank top and yoga pants, and got back on the couch to check her email for real. 45 minutes later, he burst through the front door, his face pink, his shirt sticking to his chest. And holy shit, she wanted to pull his clothes off immediately. "How was your run?" she asked him. He tugged his shirt off and wiped his face with it. Now she really couldn't stop staring at him. "You changed." His chest was glistening, and his dark brown chest hairs stuck to his body. "And those shorts. Did he have anything on under those shorts?" She put her laptop on the coffee table. "I took a shower." He kicked his shoes into the corner of the room and took a step toward her. "If you keep looking at me that way, I'm going to pull you into the shower with me in about 30 seconds flat." With him closer to her now, her head was just about even with his waist. 10 seconds. She hooked her thumbs around his waistband and pulled his shorts down. It took closer to 15 seconds, but only because she stopped to throw off her clothes before he turned on the water. Thank goodness she'd packed her blow dryer. "So who all is going to be at this party?" Alexa asked him on Sunday as they ate a late breakfast on the couch. She'd convinced him to make her pancakes this time. And not to toot his own horn, but they turned out pretty great. A bunch of people you've probably heard me talk about, the guys from my basketball league, Carlos, Robin and Lucy, those girls you met last night, lots of other people I don't know. He paused. Some of the dudes from my basketball league who'll be there are black. FYI. She smiled and squeezed his hand. Thanks for letting me know. She took another sip of coffee. Whose party is it again? Heather's. She's an old friend of mine. She's got a great house right on the beach. He should probably mention that he dated her, just so she wouldn't find out from someone else. Heather and I used to sort of date, but that was a long time ago. Oh. She twisted a finger around a lock of her hair. Okay. She looked down at her half-eaten pancakes, so he couldn't see her face. What time should we go? Did she not care that he dated Heather? It's not like he wanted her to be all jealous about it. Okay, maybe just a little jealous would be nice. I kind of wanted to go on the early side, since I'm on call tonight. So, like, 4 or 5? She opened her mouth, closed it, and drew her knees up against her chest. Maybe. He wrapped his arms around her, knees included. I can go for another run, and it can end like it did yesterday? She turned her head back toward him, and he claimed her mouth. You taste like syrup, she said, when they ended the kiss. If you like that, I have plenty more syrup, you know. There are many things we can do with it that don't involve pancakes. She turned more fully around. That sounds interesting. Waffles, you mean? Do you have a waffle iron? He shook his head. Biscuits? My mom always puts syrup on biscuits. He ran his hand down that deep V of his flannel robe that she loved to wear. And that he loved for her to wear. Nope, he said, his hand lingering at her left breast. She wiggled her shoulder, and the robe fell. Then I don't know. Tell me. He leaned forward to whisper in her ear as his hands roamed over her body. Didn't have time for a run before the party. Alexa realized, after 30 seconds at Heather's party, that she was out of her element. Maybe every woman at the party wasn't blonde, but wow, did it sure look like it. And not just blonde, but that perfect honey blonde with golden highlights, all either up in swinging ponytails or down in flowing waves, in utter defiance of the humid air from the coast. And it wasn't just the hair. They were all wearing those barely their dresses, the kind that you couldn't wear a bra with, the kind that Alexa always walked right by in the store, and their bodies looked perfect in them. She looked down at herself in the forgiving red and white polka dot A-line dress she'd felt cute in before leaving Drew's apartment. Inside, she saw at a glance she was the only black person there, but at least she knew more would show up eventually. She squeezed Drew's hand, grateful again to him for thinking to tell her that. He smiled down at her. Oh great, there's Heather, Drew said. Oh great. His ex. She had originally been glad he'd told her that tidbit of information before they'd arrived at the party. Way better than if she found out from another guest, or even worse, from Heather herself. But right now, as tall, thin, blonde Heather turned to greet her, she wished she didn't know. Heather, this is Alexa, Drew was saying. Alexa noticed that he didn't hesitate this time. She wasn't even my today, huh? Alexa, Heather. We brought beer. Drew, good to see you. Heather hugged first him, then Alexa. Given no choice in the matter, Alexa returned the hug. Nice to meet you. Beer goes in the kitchen. Go outside and join the party. I've got lots of beer and sangria, and the grills are all going. They joined a group of people outside, Drew with a beer and Alexa with a glass of sangria. She almost coughed when she took a sip. There was a lot more alcohol in that sangria than she'd been expecting. Drew introduced her to more people, and she tried to deal with this party the way she would at work. Smile, make small talk, ask questions, get people talking about themselves. Like the way she'd done at the wedding. The thing was, right now she was too anxious to be professional Alexa. When she was at work events, she was confident. There, she knew who she was and what she was doing. The wedding had been a lark, with a guy she barely knew, where she was just playing a role. Here, none of those things were true. She felt uncertain. Off-kilter. She took another sip of sangria and plastered a smile on her face. She fell back on the time-honored way to befriend strange women. Compliments. "I love your sandals," she said to a woman named Emma. "At least she was strawberry blonde, thanks," Emma said. Like lobbing a tennis ball back to Alexa, she returned the compliment. "Great lipstick. I always wish I could wear red lipstick, but with this hair, I feel like it always clashes." "Oh no, I think there's a perfect red lipstick for everyone. It just takes trial and error. You need plenty of time at Sephora and a friend you trust." They talked about makeup for a while longer. Either the conversation or the glass of sangria relaxed Alexa enough so that she stopped scanning the party for someone with brown skin or an errant eyebrow hair or even a tiny roll of fat. She walked over to refill her glass of sangria. A guy Drew had just introduced her to followed her. "Alexa, right? Having fun so far?" He put an arm around her. "Lots of huggers at this party. Yeah, it's great." She stepped to the side so she could pour her drink. "Mike, right?" "Yeah, so smart of you to remember." Mike liked to stand close, didn't he? "So Alexa, where are you from?" She took a sip of her sangria and a half step backward. "Berkeley. I'm just down here for the weekend." "Oh look, he'd moved closer. You live in Berkeley?" "That's cool. But I meant, like, where are you really from?" Now she knew where this was going. Like she couldn't really be from California? Why did people always try to ask her about her ethnicity in the clumsiest of all possible ways? Getting this question, especially in this way, always made her feel like such an object of curiosity. Today it made her feel like even more of an other in this party full of golden-haired beauty queens. Now she was doubly annoyed with Mr. Stan's too close. So she was going to fuck with him. "Oh, not that far from there. I grew up in Oakland. Northern California girl." She gave him her biggest, fakest grin. He chuckled and took another swig of his beer. No, like where are you from? Where are your parents from?" This conversation was so predictable. Yet this dance people did was irritating every time. "My parents are from California, too. My dad grew up here in LA, actually, and my mom up in the Bay Area. What about yours?" She felt a hand land on the small of her back and relaxed. She turned and saw Drew there next to her, as she knew he would be. "Is Mike monopolizing you?" He grinned at Mike and did that hand slap thing guys did instead of hugging. "How's it going, man?" Mike's eyes flashed to Drew's arm disappearing around her back, and he took a step backward. Good, just stop to chat here with your friend Alicia." She gritted her teeth, not even caring anymore if it looked like a smile. "Alexa." Mike laughed and lifted his glass of sangria to hers. Right, Alexa, of course. "Nice to talk to you." She walked with Drew toward the grills. As soon as they were out of earshot, she said, "I don't like that guy." He stopped walking and turned to her. "Why, what did he do?" She made a face. "Remember that Bill guy from the wedding? Creepy and borderline offensive?" Now he stopped walking. "It wasn't borderline. Mike's like that guy? Damn it, I'm sorry. I should have come to find you earlier." He believed her. Just like that. So often, guys would jump in to defend other men when women said they'd crossed a line. It had happened to her over and over again. But Drew had immediately believed her. Why did a little thing like that touch her so much? She reached for his hand. "No, it was okay, I handled it. Just come over if you see him cornering me again." He squeezed her hand and smiled. "Absolutely. Here, let's go talk to some better people." He introduced her to his friend Luke, another doctor at his hospital, and Luke's husband, Brendan, one of the aforementioned dudes from his basketball league. "Ah, you're the reason for Drew's mysterious trips up to the Bay Area as of late," Luke said. "So nice to meet you." Was Drew blushing? It could just be sunburn, but she hadn't noticed his cheeks that color pink 5 minutes ago. Nice to meet you, too, Luke, Brendan. Brendan gestured at her drink. Is that the sangria? How is it? She took another sip and realized she was almost halfway through this glass. It's great, but be forewarned, it has more of a kick to it than I expected. If Drew has to carry me out of here in a few hours, it's because I had more than 2 glasses of this stuff. Uh-oh, Drew said. Should I go get us some food to soak up all of that alcohol? There are burgers, hot dogs, sausages, definitely a hot dog, Alexa said. It's the 4th of July. It's un-American not to have a hot dog. Luke's eyebrows went up and he opened his mouth. Brendan kicked him and he closed it. I saw that, Alexa said, and all 4 of them laughed. I don't know you quite well enough for a sausage joke yet, so pretend you didn't see that. Luke paused. I can tell it after you've had that 3rd sangria. Drew groaned. Oh no, I'm scared to leave you with these 2 now. God only knows what they're going to do or say. Alexa waved Drew away. Go on, get me my hot dog. I can't wait to see the looks on their faces as I eat it and they have to hold their jokes in. Maybe for dessert there will be popsicles? After all 4 of them ate hot dogs, with most of the jokes at Drew's expense, Alexa excused herself to both refresh her sangria and go to the bathroom. Coming out of the bathroom, she ran into Heather and Emma, along with Lucy and Robin from the night before. Hey, Alexa. Heather said. Having fun? I was just taking this crew to the kitchen for some of the white sangria. I haven't put it out yet. Do you want to try it? Never one to say no to an offer like that, Alexa followed the other women into the kitchen. So Alexa, Heather said as she poured the sangria, do you live here in Santa Monica? Alexa glanced around the room to see if the others were all looking at her. Not yet, at least. How long ago had Heather and Drew dated? She wondered if the ranks were going to close against her like with Molly's bridesmaids at the wedding. No, just here for the weekend. I live up in Berkeley, actually. Lucy's eyes shot to her face. What had she said? Are you from there? What do you do up there? Lucy took a sip of her own sangria without her eyes leaving Alexa's face. Yeah. Yeah, I'm from the Bay Area. I work for the mayor of Berkeley. The other 3 women burst out laughing. She looked around at the 4 of them with raised eyebrows. What did I say? Was this going to be like junior high, where people would corner you and laugh in your face? Robin took a sip of her sangria and grinned. Oh, we're just laughing because we know Lucy isn't going to leave your side for the rest of the night. Lucy rolled her eyes. Don't worry, they're making fun of me, not you. See, I keep talking about quitting my job as a teacher and going to law school, and the law school at Berkeley is supposed to be great for the kind of law I want to do. But just because you work for the mayor and live there doesn't mean you're an expert on the law school, does it? Alexa held her glass out to Heather for a refill. Maybe not an expert, but I did graduate from Berkeley Law School, so. Lucy crossed the room so fast she almost knocked into Heather. Tell me everything. After Alexa went inside, Drew got his share of teasing from Luke and Brendan. Good God, you should see the way you look at her, Luke said. It's like me when I'm looking at a really fat sausage? Brendan suggested. Oh, shut up, both of you, Drew said, after Luke and Brendan recovered from their peals of laughter. No, but it's cute, Brendan said. Look at you, you keep glancing toward the house to see if she's coming back and trying to pretend that you're just looking at your drink. Drew shifted his eyes back in their direction. Okay, fine, they caught him looking for her. He was just trying to make sure she made it back outside okay. No, that excuse didn't even work in his own head. Eventually, Kat, another doctor at the hospital, came over to them. Hey, Drew, she said. Did I see you running on the beach yesterday? I shouted to you, but if it was you, you didn't answer. Kat lived not far from him, and they went running together sometimes. Around noon? Yeah, that was me. I guess I was preoccupied. Sorry, I didn't say hi. He glanced toward the house again. Huh? What could you have been preoccupied with this weekend? Brendan said, between bites of hot dog. Or should I say, who? You two are such assholes, Drew said. He didn't know if they heard him through their laughter. Enough law school talk, Heather ordered. By this time, they were all sitting around the kitchen table. Let's talk about something more interesting. Alexa, how did you meet Drew? Which story was she supposed to tell? They hadn't really discussed that. We met at a wedding. She took another sip. Oh well, if Drew didn't want her to tell the truth, he should have told her their cover story before she'd had all of this sangria. Sort of. In the elevator a few days before his ex-girlfriend's wedding, actually. He needed a date, and I was free that night, so the whole table cracked up, Alexa included. Oh, that's such a Drew story, Robin said. Meets a girl in an elevator, convinces her to go with him to a wedding that night. It wasn't that night. It was Emma broke in. Was this that wedding in May? Oh man, I was supposed to go with him to that wedding, but my dad had surgery so I couldn't go. Wait, this was that Emma? Had everyone at this table dated Drew? Has everyone at this table dated Drew? Shit, she probably shouldn't have said that out loud. But at least now she'd get an answer, not me. Lucy said. But Heather, Emma, and Robin all rose their hands. Huh, he's a sweetheart, Robin said. We had a great time while it lasted. Everyone else at the table nodded. How long did? Why did it end? Alexa asked them. What was she supposed to do? Not ask these women who had all dated Drew that, when she was both tipsy and had been thinking about that very topic for days? She did not have that much willpower. Heather was the one who answered her. At least for me, it was when it was going really well. I was starting to think, well, whatever, I've been over it for a while. But after about 2 months, he came over one night and gave me a little speech about how it was best to end things when we were still friends. Emma jumped in. Yeah, I got that same speech. He was really sweet about it, though. Even sent me flowers afterward, to make sure there were no hard feelings. Robin laughed. I got the same speech, also after about 2 months, but no flowers. The flowers must be new. Heather jumped in. It's a testament to what a great guy Drew is that we all still like him. And one another. He obviously only dates great women. She stood up and refilled everyone's sangria cups. So what did you put in that sangria anyway? She asked. The subject changed to cocktail recipes. Alexa did her best to chime in with her favorites as her mind was swirling. Maybe she didn't want to get those answers from Drew after all. Drew almost went into the house to find Alexa at least 3 times and stopped himself each time. Finally, he saw her walking across the lawn with Lucy and Robin. He and Kat wandered over to them. When he put his hand on the small of her back, she jumped. Hey, it's just me. She'd probably been on edge from Mike irritating her earlier. You having fun? Yeah. She took a step away from him and looked at the group around them. It's great. She reached her hand out to Kat, that smile from the wedding on her face again. Hi, I'm Alexa. Oh, I'm sorry. Drew jumped in. Kat, this is Alexa. She's here visiting this weekend. Alexa, this is Kat. She's also a doctor and a sometime running buddy of mine. Great. So nice to meet you, Kat. Alexa took another sip of her drink and turned back to Lucy and Robin. Was something wrong? It felt like something was wrong. What were you ladies up to inside for so long? Brendan asked as he came up to the group. Robin, Lucy, and Alexa all laughed. Alexa was looking at them, not at him. Why wasn't she sharing this laughter with him? Oh, just chatting, Lucy said. Well, drinking and chatting, anyway. She turned to Alexa. Oh God, Alexa, I forgot to tell you that story about how 2 of my students got arrested. It tested every instinct I had when they told me about it, because I wanted to laugh so hard, but I knew I shouldn't. As Lucy went on to tell a long story about her students and a cemetery and getting chased by security guards into blackberry bushes, Drew watched Alexa. She was totally relaxed with the other women, smiling and laughing without that fake smile that he hated on her face. That smile had been his sign to come over when she was talking to Mike, but she still had that tense look around her eyes. When he touched her arm, she turned toward him, but her body was stiff. "Everything okay?" he said in a low voice. She flashed a smile, but it didn't reassure him. It didn't have that glitter of joy hovering behind her eyes like her real smiles usually did. "Fine," she said. "Want to get me more sangria?" When he came back with the sangria, he brought a plate of chips and guacamole for them to share. This time when he joined the group, he slid an arm around her waist, but she stepped away from him. "Oh look, Heather's bringing out the cupcakes. Let me go see if she needs help." So she walked off to help Heather with the cupcakes, leaving him with one arm empty, and one hand weighed down with a full plate of chips. "Those for me?" Carlos asked from behind him. "Hey, man, when'd you get here?" Carlos reached for a handful of his chips. "Just now." "Why are you looking so forlorn? Where's Alexa?" He gestured with his empty hand. "She's over there, asshole." Helping Heather do something with cupcakes, he paused as he saw Alexa and Heather talking to three men he didn't know. I guess Heather introduced her to some more people. Carlos looked at him for a long moment but just nodded. "Cool, I'll go say hi." "Where are the drinks?" Drew pointed and went back to munching on chips and listening to Lucy and Brendan talk about surfing. Forlorn? He wasn't forlorn. It was possible he would prefer Alexa to be standing next to him than over on the other side of the party talking to three strange men, but he wasn't forlorn. Watched Carlos approach her group and tap her on the shoulder. Alexa threw her arms around Carlos and beamed her 100-watt smile at him and absorbed him in her cozy little group. Drew waited for her to look around for him. She was probably just waiting to catch his eye to signal to him to come join them. But she didn't turn her head. Alexa was glad she hadn't tried to have the talk with Drew before coming to the party. She would have made some humiliating speech about how she felt about him and how she wanted a relationship with him, and he would have looked at her with pity in his eyes. She'd always known what the deal was. That was the worst part. She'd known from the beginning who and what he was. He'd told her so. What did she think? Someone like her was going to change him? She kept trying to snap out of it, to give herself a mental pep talk. But every time she caught a glimpse of Drew standing next to Kat, his hot blonde running buddy, she needed more sangria to wash down the bitter taste of shame. Thank God at least no one knew. She hadn't told Drew how she felt, and she was almost certain she'd managed to keep her face relaxed and jokey in the kitchen with the other women. She wouldn't be able to handle their sympathy on top of the sadness that she knew was hovering in the back of her eyes. Tea would be so much easier if she could be mad at Drew. But Drew had done nothing wrong. He'd been perfectly honest with her the whole time. It was her own fault for making up stories in her head about what it meant that he looked at her this way or touched her that way or had that tone in his voice when he talked to her. 24 hours until her plane left LAX. She could keep pushing that sadness in its little box for 24 hours until she'd be able to let it out. She kept unconsciously looking around the party for a friendly face. Someone familiar, who she could relax around, not be so on with, just be herself. Someone who she didn't have to smile and fake it with. But the only person like that was Drew, and looking at him hurt now, after another glass of sangria, she felt a hand on her shoulder and turned. Carlos. Finally, someone she'd known more than an hour. "I was hoping you were going to be here. How've you been?" She hugged him, not sure if the tears that shot to her eyes during the hug were because she was glad to see him, or because of the sangria. Probably a little of both. At least she'd get to say goodbye to Carlos. He'd been so nice to her. Great. He toasted her plastic cup with his bottle of beer, his arm slung around her shoulder. "I knew you'd be here. Drew's found ways to mention you all week." She looked down at her cup. Sure he had. Drew came over to join their group, but this time she saw him coming, so she could dodge his touch without being obvious about it. She couldn't handle that warm, firm touch on her back or around her waist right now. She'd taken such comfort in it, thought it meant so much, but it had turned out to mean nothing at all. Instead of soothing her, now it made her angry. Mostly at herself, she left Drew and Carlos behind and walked with Lucy to get more of the white sangria. Intellectually, she knew that she should probably stop drinking so much, but following Lucy was a good way to escape. As was the sangria itself. Was it his imagination that Alexa was avoiding him? Probably. It was probably his imagination. But the thing was, for the past hour, she'd walked around with Heather and Emma, and Robin and Lucy, and chatted with a whole group of guys he'd never met. Every time he walked up to her, she'd moved when he'd touched her and had some reason to walk away after a minute or so. He left her alone for a while and talked to other people, but he was always aware of where she was and who she was talking to. He told himself it was just so he could rescue her from Mike if necessary. Even in his head he knew that wasn't true. Finally, he saw her standing alone over by the drinks table and walked toward her, determined to figure out what was wrong. Before he could get there, Carlos came up to her, threw an arm around her, and said something in her ear that made her laugh so hard he could hear it from across the backyard. When he reached the two of them, they were both still giggling. "Hey guys, having fun over here?" He reached for Alexa's hand, but she switched her drink from her left to right. She'd looked in his direction but turned back to Carlos, the smile still on her face but no longer in her eyes. Carlos grinned at him, but was that guilt in his face? What was Carlos whispering to his girlfriend about, anyway? "Yeah, we were just talking about the party," Carlos said, flashing his eyes back toward Alexa. They shared a grin that made Drew feel like a third wheel. "You two are looking kind of cozy. What are you, planning your escape so you can be alone together?" Drew joked. Except somehow it didn't really come out like a joke. Alexa looked straight at him for what felt like the first time that afternoon. Was that some kind of accusation? Because it felt like it. Carlos's arm dropped from around Alexa's shoulders. Drew felt a flash of anger that it had been there in the first place, especially when she hadn't wanted him to touch her all day. "Looks like I struck a nerve." Why did he even say that? He didn't really believe something was going on with Carlos and Alexa, did he? "I don't know, Drew," Alexa shot back. "You planning your escape from me so you can figure out which of the women here will be your new friend? I can go home now so you don't have an inconvenient sandwich at this buffet." Okay, something was definitely wrong. What the fuck is that supposed to mean? Drew said. Alexa's lips curved into what some people might think was a smile. "Pretty much exactly what I said." She took the last sip of her drink and put it down. "Wait, you probably don't remember. In this instance, the sandwich and the buffet are a metaphor for." "I know what it's a fucking metaphor for, Alexa. I remember. What's your problem today?" "Good luck with this," Carlos muttered from behind him as he backed away. "What's my problem today?" Alexa wasn't even pretending to smile anymore. "My problem is that I'm tired of meeting all of your perfectly nice friends who are checking my forehead for my Drew Nichols expiration date. It was cute at the wedding, but it's not fun or funny for me anymore, especially since I have a strong feeling that my expiration date is July 5th. He grabbed her hand hard enough that she couldn't pull away and marched her into Heather's house and up the stairs. He closed the door once they got inside Heather's bedroom. "Okay, now can we please talk about this without an audience?" The walk up the stairs had calmed him down. "What's going on here?" "I was just kidding about the Carlos thing. I shouldn't have said that." She laughed. Her laugh didn't sound like Alexa's laugh. "What would it matter to you anyway if I was fucking Carlos? Like you would care." Whoa, where had that come from? "What the fuck, Alexa? You know that's not true. Come on, what happened? What changed between now and this morning?" He took a step toward her and she backed away. "Nothing you need to worry about, Drew. Go back outside, hang out with your friend Kat. I can occupy myself." His shoulders relaxed. She was jealous. He could fix this. It was going to be okay. "Is that what this is about?" "Monroe, nothing is going on between me and Kat, we're just friends." Something suddenly occurred to him. "I should have told you, I used to date Robin and Emma." "Did they tell you that? Were they weird to you? Is that why you're mad?" Alexa threw up her hands. "No, Drew, everyone here is great. The women are nice and collegial, all welcoming me to the club of people who have had their month or so of sleeping with the great Drew Nichols, with that slight pity in their eyes when they look at me because they know what's coming. The men all look me up and down like they're ready to jump me as soon as you're done with me, because they assume there must be something good in there if I'm worthy of you. Same as it's ever been since the wedding, honestly. He still didn't understand what was wrong. Maybe he was never going to understand women. Why do you keep bringing up the wedding? I thought everything was fine at the wedding. Better than fine. She took a step toward him. Finally, she wasn't backing away anymore. Everything was fine at the wedding because the wedding wasn't real. I'd met you 2 days before. I didn't know you, I didn't know anything about you, and I didn't care about you then. He smiled and reached for her. Does that mean you care about me now? She dodged his hand and stepped around him toward the bedroom door. Fuck you, Drew. Apparently, that had been the wrong thing to say. No, wait, Alexa. I didn't. I don't understand. Please don't leave. He needed to fix this. He didn't want her to be mad. He didn't want this to be over. Her hand dropped from the doorknob, but her back was still to him. He had to say something to get her to turn around. Maybe honesty would work. What do you mean the wedding wasn't real? It felt real to me. It had. From the moment he'd first touched her, it had felt like she belonged there by his side, smiling at him, joking with him, confiding in him, listening to him, being silent with him. Everything about this had felt real from the beginning, even when he barely knew her. Now that he really knew her, and she knew him, it felt more than real. It felt like his life finally made sense. He'd tried to pretend to himself all week that he would end things with her after this weekend, but he'd known as soon as he saw her at the airport that that wasn't true. Not only that he wouldn't, but he couldn't. She turned around, and for a minute he felt like he'd said the right thing. That was, until he saw the look on her face. Here's how I know the wedding wasn't real, Drew. Because at the wedding, you called me your girlfriend. In real life, I'm nothing to you. He shook his head. She was so far from nothing. That's not, it is true. Since the wedding, I've been just Alexa, or sometimes my friend Alexa, or occasionally dramatic pause Alexa. But never your girlfriend, because in real life, Drew Nichols doesn't do girlfriends. Which is fine, that's fine, at least you're honest, but don't try to pretend that I'm making this up right now. Oh, thank God, she could finally legitimately be mad at Drew. She'd felt guilty being mad at him earlier. It hadn't been his fault that she had feelings for him, or that she'd wanted him to return those feelings so much she'd almost convinced herself that he did. But it was his fault that he was now trying to act like he'd wanted her with him at the wedding for anything more than a shield. And it sure as hell was his fault he sounded so smug she'd admitted she cared about him. He rubbed his eyes and ran his fingers through his hair. Even after all of this, she had to fight to not reach up and touch it. Alexa, can we talk about this, please? She shook her head. The patented Drew breakup talk was the last thing she wanted right now. No need for a conversation. I know the drill. He stepped closer to her. She was annoyed that even in the midst of this fight they were never going to come back from. She just wanted to step into his arms and have him tell her everything was going to be okay. Come on, can you calm down for a minute and let me say something? That solved that problem. Nothing pissed her off more than a man telling her to calm down. I get it. My feelings aren't worth anything to you, but I can be as uncalm as I want about this. No, that's not what I meant. I just want to. He paused and put his hand on her arm. I just want to explain. At his touch, tears shot to her eyes. She shook his arm off and turned away from him. Don't worry about it, Drew. You don't need to explain. Your feelings come through loud and clear. She opened the door and ran back downstairs before he could reach for her again. Thank God no one was in the bathroom. She ducked in there for a few minutes to take a deep breath and swallow the tears that had threatened. She washed her hands, dabbed cold water under her eyes, and faked a smile at herself in the mirror like she hadn't just had a sangria-fueled relationship-ending fight in the middle of a party. When she walked out of the bathroom, she ran into Heather, coming out of the kitchen with more cupcakes. Awesome, you can help me carry these. Heather handed her a tray of cupcakes. Thankful for something to do, Alexa carried them outside. She took a deep breath before she walked through the door, but a quick scan of the crowd showed her no evidence of either Drew or Carlos in the yard. She did see Lucy, though, and put 2 red velvet cupcakes on a plate for the 2 of them. You said this was your favorite, right? Alexa held out the plate to Lucy, and soon they both had red tongues and lips smeared in cream cheese frosting. Robin joined them with a cupcake of her own and a pile of napkins. Alexa had just relaxed a little and wiped her mouth when the circle opened and she heard Drew's voice, "Alexa." His voice was steady, like their fight had made no impact on him. "I got a call. I've got to be at the hospital in 30 minutes. He touched his hand to her shoulder and dropped it almost as quickly. "Sorry to do this to you guys, but I have to take Alexa away from you, duty calls." She thought about telling him that she'd stay, that she could get a ride home later, and also that he could go fuck himself, but her political training hadn't completely deserted her. Not even this much sangria would allow her to let all of these people know her business. So instead, she gave everyone in the group hugs goodbye amid false promises of getting drinks the next time she was in town and followed Drew to his car. Drew had stayed in Heather's bedroom for a while after Alexa had fled. He'd wanted to run after her, to tell her no, she'd gotten it all wrong, that wasn't how he felt. But he'd already made a mess of this conversation, so he figured he should maybe wait and try again when they got home after the party and could really talk. But then he got the call from the hospital and had to run outside and grab her in a hurry. He'd thought about asking Carlos to drive her home, but after basically accusing Carlos of hitting on her, he wasn't in the best position to ask Carlos for a favor. Plus, he didn't want Alexa to think he was pissed at her and had ditched her at the party. However, from the look on her face and the way she refused to meet his eyes when he found her outside, he thought for a second that she'd tell him to go on without her. That would have pissed him off. That he could tell she'd considered it even pissed him off. They drove without talking for a few minutes, the only noise in the car the pop music she'd been singing along to on the way there. She broke the silence before he could. "Did you really get a call from the hospital, or was that just your excuse to leave?" That's when he lost his temper. "What the fuck, Alexa? Really? You really think I would make up a call from the hospital just to get you out of there? Do you think I'm that much of a child?" She didn't respond, and when he glanced her way, she just shrugged. That made his temper flare even higher. "Really? You have that low of an opinion of me, just because I didn't introduce you to people as my girlfriend? Just because I don't use the exact word that you want me to use to describe you, you decide I'm the kind of asshole who would lie to you and all of my friends like that? When you decided to push back our dinner reservations by an hour last night because you were on the phone with your buddy Teddy writing one fucking sentence together for 45 minutes, did I call you a controlling bitch workaholic who doesn't pay attention to anyone else's feelings? No, I didn't, but I sure as hell could have." He thought he saw her flinch out of the corner of his eye, but when he turned to look at her, her face was impassive. "At least I finally know what you really think of me." He turned into his parking spot, his sudden anger gone as quickly as it had come. "No, Alexa, I didn't." She was out of the car before he could say anything else. He followed her up to his apartment, unlocked the door, and pushed it open for her before following her inside. "I shouldn't have said that. I didn't mean it, that's not how I feel," he said as soon as he'd shut the door. Her back was still to him as she walked around the living room picking up her stuff. "Alexa. Come on, talk to me." She finally turned to him. He looked at the pile of her stuff in her hands. "Wait a minute, what are you doing?" She neatly piled it all into the big purse she always used on the airplane. "What does it look like I'm doing? Why are you still here? Don't you have to go to the hospital?" He shook his head in reaction to what she'd said. "In reaction to everything, no. I mean, yes, I have to go to the hospital, but no, please don't pack. Don't leave now. You can't leave now. I have to talk to you." She stood there, silently, staring somewhere around the base of his neck but not meeting his eyes. He closed the distance between them and held on to her shoulders. She finally looked up at him but still didn't say anything. "Promise me. promise you won't leave. If this has meant anything to you at all, promise me you won't leave while I'm at the hospital." She closed her eyes and dropped her head, but he didn't let go of her. Finally, she whispered, "Okay. I promise." He pulled her into his arms. She leaned her head against his shoulder for a quick second before she stepped backward. "Go. You're going to be late." She was right. He looked back over his shoulder at her on his way out the door, but she had already turned to look out the window. Alexa dropped into a chair and put her head in her hands as soon as he walked out the door. What a fucking nightmare the past few hours had been. She'd planned the whole way home in the car to pack and take a cab to the airport as soon as he left for the hospital, but now she couldn't even do that. She was usually the last person who would leave in the middle of a fight. She liked to finish any discussion, she liked closure, and she always wanted to know exactly where she stood, but this time she couldn't wait to get out of there. She already knew where she stood, she didn't need him to say it out loud. She didn't want to finish this fight, didn't want him to tell her what she knew was coming, didn't want to have to deal with the pain of listening to the gentle breakup speech he'd perfected on the dozen women who came before her. What would be even worse was if he didn't give her the breakup speech today. If instead, he found some way to convince her to stay with him. That would just postpone the inevitable and make it hurt all the more when he finally decided to move on. And make her feel even more stupid when he did. That's why she had to get out of there. Fly back to Berkeley so she could hide inside of her apartment and eat ice cream and cry for an entire day before she had to face anyone. But now she'd promised him she wouldn't leave, and as much as she wanted to break that promise, she wouldn't. And now she had to sit here and wait, with only her own thoughts for company. She thought about calling Maddie, but she knew if she did she would break down on the phone, and the last thing she wanted was to have Drew walk in on her while she was sobbing her heart out over him. Instead, she changed, finished packing, and tried and failed to concentrate on work. Finally, she got into Drew's bed and pulled up Anne of Green Gables on her iPad. And was right to smash her slate over Gilbert's head. Fuck him for calling her carrots. Drew got home much later that night, after an easy but long surgery. Thank God it had been an easy one. His mind was half on Alexa the entire time. Part of him was pissed at her that she'd started a fight over what seemed like nothing, but the rest of him was terrified that she'd left and he'd never see her again. One thing she'd said at the party had kept ringing in his ears: "In real life, I'm nothing to you." Was that how she really felt? Was that how he'd made her feel? Because now he realized how far from the truth that was. She meant more to him than he could say. Than he knew how to say. The whole way up the stairs to his apartment, he prayed that she'd kept her promise and was still there. He tiptoed into his bedroom, hoping she was there, not sure what to do if she was. He'd been rehearsing what to say the whole drive home, but now everything that he'd thought of seemed stupid and inadequate. He stopped in the doorway of his bedroom and sighed in relief. All of his lights were on, and Alexa was asleep in that way that was so familiar to him now, curled up on her side in his bed, the covers pulled up to her chin, her iPad resting on her face. He turned the lights off and undressed in the dark. He moved the iPad to the bedside table and crawled in next to her. He'd always loved getting in bed with her. It was one of his favorite things about her, the way she would melt into his arms every time he put his arms around her. But this time, she stiffened at his touch. It broke his heart. He tightened his arms around her and kissed her neck, her hair, the side of her face. After a few seconds, he felt her relax. He reached up and stroked her hair. "Alexa, please. Please, can we talk?" She turned in his arms and rested her head against his chest, but didn't say anything. "I'm sorry about what I said earlier. I got frustrated, and I didn't mean it. Please, forgive me, sweetheart." Her face was hidden in his chest, so at first, he only heard her irregular breathing and didn't realize the cause. But when he reached down to stroke her face and tilted up toward his, he felt the tears on her face. "Oh no, Alexa. Oh, please no, don't cry." He kissed her forehead and pulled her closer to his chest, but she only cried harder. "I can't do this, Drew." He could barely understand her through her sobs. "This is too. It hurts too much." We can't do this anymore. No. He hoped that he'd heard her wrong, but he knew that wasn't the case. No, that's not. Please don't do this. Don't do this to me. To us. Alexa, please. I want this more than anything. You make me so happy. We make me so happy. She shook her head and sobbed harder. Oh, Drew, you're so. Please don't make this even. He bent down to kiss her wet face, cutting her off before she could finish talking. She kissed him back hard, still hiccuping as her hands roamed his body. He caressed her breasts as he kissed her. He cut off the kiss just long enough to pull her tank top over her head and moved down her body. She dug her fingernails into his shoulders, and he hissed, but she didn't stop. He didn't want her to stop. He moved farther down her body, knowing by her slightest twist and moan and gasp where he should linger. Her hands were tight in his hair, and he felt the tug on his scalp just before he heard her gasp and felt her contract around him. He lifted his head and looked down at her. Her eyes were closed, but the tears were once again running down her cheeks. He kissed them away. She opened her eyes when she heard the crinkle of the condom wrapper opening. He was kneeling between her thighs, looking at her in that way he'd looked at her since the beginning, like he couldn't wait to touch her, like he couldn't wait for her to touch him. She couldn't wait either. She ran her hands up and down his warm chest. He picked up her hands and kissed them. He pinned them above her head, holding on to her wrists with one hand. He bent closer to her until his mouth was almost on hers, his body inches away, but he didn't close the short distance. She moved to meet him, but he moved away, a faint smile dancing around his lips. You know what I want, he said. Tell me. Tell me what you want. She looked at him, all warm and golden and strong above her. She said what was in her heart. You. I want you. He pushed her legs wide open and slid inside of her. Their twin moans echoed around the room. Too quickly, her whole body tensed and she exploded, tears once again streaming from her eyes, words she knew she would be embarrassed about later coming from her mouth. He quickened his pace and came, collapsing on top of her when the tremors throughout his body finally stopped. You have me, he said in her ear, so low she wasn't sure if she'd heard him right. When Drew woke up the next morning, she was gone. He turned over in bed and reached for her, but her side of the bed was empty and cold. He sat up and looked around the room. The floor was bare in that corner where he'd been tripping over her suitcase all weekend. God damn it. He got out of bed and looked around the apartment, but all evidence of her was gone. He looked for his phone and found it sitting in the middle of the coffee table. Waiting for him. I'm sorry about how I acted at the party. You and I both know this is over. I had a great time with you, Drew. That was it? That was motherfucking it? I had a great time with you? He'd told her how he felt last night, and then she fucking disappeared in the morning like he was some one-night stand she couldn't wait to get away from. He lay flat on his back on the sofa, still naked. How fucking perfect that the first time he'd really cared about a woman in years she'd fled the scene without even saying goodbye. He should tell Molly about this, she'd get a good laugh out of it. He sat up and grabbed his phone. He was going to text Alexa back, tell her to get back here, that he wanted to talk to her. This was more than just a great time. Why the fuck had she left before they had a chance to talk? He typed out the text to her in a flurry. Right before he was about to hit send, he dropped the phone. He tucked it under the couch cushions and sat on it for good measure. He flopped onto his back again and covered his head with a couch cushion. Why was he being so fucking emotional? He'd ended things with girls lots of times. Was this how they all felt when he did it? He hoped not, otherwise he would feel like an asshole. He felt his ass vibrate, sat bolt upright, and fished the phone from underneath it. Maybe she was at the airport and had second thoughts and was texting him to say that she was on her way back. Maybe she was right outside and was texting him to say she was about to knock on the door. It was Carlos. Not Alexa. Hey man, everything cool with you and Alexa? You disappeared from Heather's last night. Oh, fuck. On top of everything else, he had to apologize to Carlosa. Hey. Sorry I was an asshole last night. He stood up to go flick the switch on the coffee pot, Glad that he'd set it up yesterday afternoon. We're cool. I don't think I'm the one you have to worry about, though. He stared at his coffee pot, now brewing twice as much coffee as he would need. Tell me about it. He shook his head. Fuck Alexa. She wasn't worth all of this. Fuck this emotional bullshit. He was going for a run. Maybe he'd run into Kat. Alexa sat on the airplane at LAX and buckled her seatbelt. She hoped this damn plane would take off soon so she wouldn't grab her bag and run back to Drew's. She'd been sitting at the airport for the past 2 hours, unshowered, her hair in a messy topknot, no makeup on. And the whole time she'd resisted the temptation to turn around and jump back under his covers and next to his warm, sleeping body before he even realized she was gone. Last night, before she'd gone to sleep, she'd planned on having an adult conversation with Drew. She wasn't going to tell him how strong her feelings were for him, because he didn't need to know that. The last thing she wanted was his pity. She'd planned to tell him it was nothing against him, but she knew how he felt about relationships, and she couldn't do this anymore. She would have just blamed the distance making it tough, and how she couldn't keep flying up and down the state anymore, how this had been fun for a couple of months, but they both knew it couldn't last much longer. All of that had the benefit of being the truth. It just wasn't the whole truth. But then he'd crawled into bed with her in the middle of the night and put his arms around her, and she'd broken down. All she'd wanted in that moment was to stay right there in his arms forever, to ignore everything in her head telling her this was never going to work and they were too different and wanted different things, and just give in to the warmth and security of his arms. The impossibility of that had made her burst into tears. Her, Alexa Monroe, who never cried, and when he said sweet things about making it work, she'd lost it completely and sobbed so hard she'd hiccuped. She knew what his version of making things work was. They'd just keep going the same way they'd been going for a while longer, a few more weeks, a month even, before she'd get his breakup speech and he'd disappear, but she wanted so much for it to be true, that he did want to make it work for real. She wanted him to love her and for them to push through all of their problems together because they loved each other enough to be able to do it. So she cried to mourn what could have been, how good his arms felt around her and his chest felt against her face, and how she would never get to feel that again. Her tears had revealed her feelings for him even more than words could have. How humiliating. She'd cultivated her poker face for years, and in the most important moment she'd had in years, it had betrayed her in the worst possible way. She'd woken up this morning with his arms still around her. She'd been too scared and ashamed to face him and have to see the look of pity on his face, or listen to his platitudes about how it wasn't her, it was him, and how he hoped they could stay friends. So instead, she'd tiptoed out of his apartment early this morning and dragged her suitcase blocks away so she could get a cab to the airport. Was that cowardly of her? Probably, but she'd rather be a coward than break down in front of him again, and in broad daylight this time, so he could see how bad she looked when she cried. And then once she actually got to the airport, she had to pay way too much money to get her flight changed from her original one. Maddie, God bless her, had asked no questions when she'd texted her to pick her up from the airport. Maddie was waiting at the curb when Alexa walked out of the airport. Maddie took a long look at her face when she got in the passenger seat. First, are we going to your house or my house? Alexa considered as Maddie drove out of the airport. Do you still need my car until you can pick yours up tomorrow? If so, my house. Okay. There was silence as Maddie got on the freeway toward Berkeley. Do you want to talk about it? Alexa dropped her head back against the headrest and closed her eyes. I don't know. I just want to be somewhere and not cry. She sighed. I've spent the past 5 hours doing everything in my power to not cry. At his house, at the airport, on the plane. She checked her phone again to see if he'd called. He hadn't. Now I can at least stop fighting it. Maddie reached for her hand and squeezed it. You want me to drive through In-N-Out on the way? Alexa shrugged. I'm not really hungry. Maddie shook her head. Now I know you're in a bad place. I'm getting you In-N-Out whether you like it or not. When they walked through Alexa's front door, everything in her house reminded her of Drew. The couch where he'd cried on her shoulder. The towel he'd stolen from the hotel for them to lie on in Dolores Park. now hanging up in her bathroom. The coffee table where he'd set her coffee while she was working. The hoodie that he'd left here on his impromptu trip and that she'd forgotten to bring back to him this weekend. She lowered herself down on the couch and put her head in her hands. Lex. She felt Maddie's hand on her shoulder and leaned into it. Maddie wrapped her arms around her. They sat there like that on the couch for a while, not talking. Eventually, Alexa sighed. You were right, I want some French fries. You got us ketchup, right? Of course. Maddie ripped the bags open and unpacked the food on top of the makeshift placemats. Now. Talk to me. Alexa dropped her head into her hands. Oh, Mad. I fucked it all up. Maddie pulled her head onto her shoulder. What happened? It was all going okay. I mean, we hadn't talked about anything, but the weekend was fine. Great. And then we went to the 4th of July party. She thought about the party, and the humiliation hit her all over again. And all of these other women. They were so nice, but they said, and he didn't. I'd had too much sangria, but oh, look, she was sobbing again. Maddie folded her into her arms and let her cry on her shoulder until she was too tired to cry anymore. She sat up and took a sip of her drink and ate a handful of cold fries. I guess I should start over again. She told Maddie the whole story, except for the part about the sex they'd had when she was weeping. That seemed too intimate, too personal, even to tell Maddie. She managed to get through the whole thing without crying, but she'd probably cried out all of her tears. Honey. Maddie stroked her hair. Alexa, I love you. I would do anything for you. You know that, right? She sighed and nodded. She'd heard this before from Maddie. Enough to know to worry about what was coming next. Okay. Why didn't you just tell him how you felt about him? And tell him what you wanted? Why did you just disappear this morning? She pushed herself to the other side of the couch. I knew what he was going to say, okay? I didn't need to hear it. Maddie looked at her. She didn't smile, or raise her eyebrows, or tilt her head. She just looked at her and wouldn't let her look away. I was scared. Is that what you want to hear? Okay, fine, I was scared to talk to him. I was scared I would pour out my heart and he would tell me he hoped we could stay friends. I was scared I would see in his face when I started talking that he felt sorry for me. I was scared I'd lay myself bare for nothing. And I was scared I would reveal my whole self to him and he would avert his eyes. She sighed. I was scared. Maddie wrapped her back up in a hug. Oh, honey. Alexa rested her head on Maddie's shoulder. Oh, look, she did have more tears in there. Maddie sat up. Does cookie dough ice cream go better with red or white wine? Alexa half laughed, half sobbed. I guess we're about to find out. Drew saw Kat on his run, but he dodged behind a truck at the last minute to avoid her. He got home in as shitty a mood as when he'd left. He ordered an enormous Hawaiian pizza and opened a bottle of rum, mostly because Alexa hated both. By 7 p.m. he never wanted to see another pineapple, but he finished the pizza just to spite her, not that she would ever know. But maybe somewhere she had a terrible taste in her mouth and it was thanks to him. He dragged himself into the hospital on Tuesday morning and managed to avoid having a conversation with anyone but his patients and their parents until almost 1 o'clock. Of course that's when Carlos burst into his office. Fuck. He was grumpy and hungover. He didn't need to deal with Carlos, never learned to knock, huh? He kept his head buried in his stack of files. How was the rest of your weekend? Everything cool with you? And Drew didn't even want to hear her name. Leave it alone, Carlos. Carlos moved the stack of books Drew had put on the guest office chair to the floor and plopped down in the chair. Drew scowled. He'd left those books on the chair to keep anyone from sitting there. He should have known that that wouldn't stop Carlos for a second. No, really, what happened? She looked pissed at the party even before you said. Drew looked up from the stupid files. I said leave it alone, Carlos.